To our wonderful viewers at Cheating Hour, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. If you like stories like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss out on our next exciting story. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know now in the comments. And if you've ever been through something like this, share your experience in the comments. Ethan McConnell adjusted the cuffs of his tailored dress shirt as he sat behind the massive oak desk in his downtown Boston office. At 41, he had built a name for himself as a high-stakes mergers attorney, known for his precision, restraint, and ability to dissect a legal contract like a surgeon with a scalpel. His name was engraved on the wall outside the firm's entrance, Prescott and McConnell, LLP. For many, it signaled success, control, and power. But for Ethan lately, it had begun to feel like a wall between the life he lived and the one he once hoped for. His wife, Laura, was dazzling in every social setting, the kind of woman who seemed to never run out of things to say or people to charm. They had met 14 years ago at a charity gala. She had been the keynote speaker, poised, witty, and radiant in a deep green satin gown. Ethan, stiff and structured in his tux, had watched her from across the room, captivated. When they eventually talked, her ease melted his reserve. She laughed at his dry humor, challenged his worldview, and for the first time, he found himself willing to deviate from his careful routines. Their marriage began like something out of a novel. Long weekends in coastal towns, spontaneous jazz bar dates, whispered conversations in the dark. But like all bright fires, something in it dimmed over time. After their son Caleb was born, things changed. Not dramatically, not violently, but subtly. Laura became more involved with her lifestyle blog, building a following of thousands who adored her design tips, parenting insights, and carefully curated snapshots of their picture-perfect life. Ethan, meanwhile, threw himself deeper into work. The firm was growing, and so were his responsibilities. They moved to an upscale suburb just outside the city, big lawn, home office, good schools. On paper, everything looked better than ever. In practice, the distance grew. Laura had her world, and Ethan had his. Their conversations became transactional. Who was picking Caleb up? Whether the dog had been walked, reminders about the HOA meeting. Intimacy turned into routine. Affection became absent-minded forehead kisses and quick texts. But Ethan never questioned her love. He had always believed in loyalty, in sticking things out, in fixing what breaks. Until Chelsea started dropping by more often. Chelsea Banks was Laura's best friend since college. She was also Ethan's personal contrast to Laura's polished sheen, sharp, serious, and always watching. She worked in editorial publishing, had a quick wit, and carried a quiet intensity that made her presence hard to ignore. Chelsea wasn't warm, not in the way Laura was, but she was real. Over the years, she'd attended all the important events, birthdays, holidays, anniversary dinners. She'd helped with babysitting when Caleb was young. She and Ethan rarely spoke deeply, but when they did, there was no fluff, just truth, sometimes uncomfortable. It was a quiet Wednesday when Chelsea first asked him, "You okay, Ethan?" They were in the kitchen. Laura was upstairs on a video call. Caleb was out at soccer practice. Chelsea had stopped by with takeout saying she wanted to catch up with Laura. But Laura had disappeared midway through the conversation, citing a content emergency for her blog. That left Ethan and Chelsea, nursing ginger ales, seated across from each other at the island. "I'm fine," Ethan had replied automatically. "You don't look it." He glanced up. "Is this the part where you tell me I need a vacation or a dog?" She didn't smile, just looked at him. "This is the part where I tell you I think something's wrong, and I'm tired of pretending I don't see it." That night, Ethan had trouble sleeping, not because of what Chelsea said, but because deep down, he knew she was right. He just didn't know what exactly was wrong. Laura wasn't cruel, she wasn't cold, she just wasn't present. He started noticing more. The late-night texts Laura would receive, the way she'd turn her phone upside down when she set it down. How she'd take sudden calls from sponsors that left her giggling down the hallway. Her new gym routine, the trendy juice cleanses, the sudden interest in spin classes. She would talk about self-care, about reinventing herself, about chasing her identity beyond motherhood and marriage. Ethan respected that. He just couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't doing it alone. One night, while Laura was out at a networking event, Ethan had stayed up waiting. She came home after midnight, a little disheveled, smelling faintly of something floral and musky that wasn't her usual perfume. When he asked how it went, she gave a vague smile and mumbled something about great contacts and how tired she was. He didn't press, but he remembered. It was Chelsea who began showing up more, sometimes with Caleb's favorite snacks, sometimes with a book she thought Ethan might like, always with some reason. At first he thought she was just being kind, but then came the day she asked if they could talk. It was a Sunday morning. Lara had taken Caleb to a museum downtown. Ethan was organizing some files in his study when Chelsea knocked on the frame of the open door. "You have a minute?" she asked. He nodded. She stepped in, closed the door behind her. "What I'm about to show you," she began, her voice low. "I didn't want to believe. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I really did. But you deserve better than being kept in the dark." She opened her phone, tapped a few times, then handed it to him. The screen lit up with messages. Dozens. Screenshots. WhatsApp. Instagram DMs. A few emails. Conversations between Lara and a man named Brent Delaney. Ethan knew that name. He was a real estate developer who had sponsored Lara's blog twice and had been a guest on her short-lived podcast. The messages weren't graphic. They didn't need to be. They were worse. Inside jokes, nicknames, emotional intimacy, long confessions about how safe she felt around him, how Ethan would never understand her dreams, how Brent saw her. There were date confirmations, photos of her outfits before meeting him, a voice note of her laughing softly, saying she couldn't wait to see him again. Ethan stared, silent. Chelsea stood across from him, unmoving. "She didn't delete them?" Chelsea shook her head. "I don't think she knew I had her iPad. She left it at my place a few days ago, said it was for Caleb's game night. She forgot it was synced to her messages." Ethan didn't speak for a long time. His fingers curled around the edge of the desk. He felt the sharp corner press into his palm, but he didn't move. "Why are you showing me this?" Chelsea exhaled. "Because you're not the man she says you are. I've seen the way you fight for this family, for her, and I couldn't keep lying to your face." Ethan finally looked up. There was no anger on his face, just quiet resolve, like something had settled into place, the kind of clarity that didn't need fire to burn. He handed the phone back. "Thank you," he said simply. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do next, but he knew one thing. Pretending everything was fine had just come to an end. Chelsea didn't expect a response right away, and she didn't get one. Ethan remained still, collected. That was who he was. Never the type to explode, never impulsive. His silence wasn't passivity, it was calculation. And for the next several days, that silence only grew. He went through his usual motions. He got Caleb ready for school. He went to work. He came home. Lara noticed nothing, or at least, she pretended not to. Ethan watched her more closely now, not with suspicion, but with precision. Her routines, her excuses, the shift in her tone when Brent's name came up in casual conversation, which it did less and less. Ethan didn't confront her. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, he quietly began his own audit. First, he started reviewing their financial accounts. Not because he suspected theft, but because that was his terrain. Cold, hard data. Credit card statements, Venmo histories, travel charges. It didn't take long to find inconsistencies. Spa weekends Lara claimed were influencer retreats turned out to be single charges for a two-person suite. Dinner bills from cities Ethan hadn't visited. Boutique hotel stays charged to a joint account he rarely checked. He printed everything, labeled each file, annotated timelines. Then came the digital side. Ethan hired a cybersecurity consultant through a discreet third-party firm he'd worked with during a merger case involving IP theft. He didn't say much, just provided access to Lara's old devices, a previous laptop she had used before switching to her new MacBook, an old phone she claimed had died. He handed over the iPad Chelsea had returned to him. Within a day, the consultant recovered fragments of deleted messages, browser histories, location logs. There were enough breadcrumbs to construct a fuller picture, and it matched what Chelsea had shown him. But Ethan wasn't interested in vengeance. He wanted clarity. He wanted context. He wanted to understand when it had started, why it had continued, and why she had let it rot the bones of a marriage he'd fought to keep steady. 2 weeks passed before Chelsea reached out again. She asked him to meet her at a quiet bar on the waterfront, one of those places with low lighting and the kind of hush that made every word feel heavier. He arrived before her, ordered a single scotch, and waited. She slid into the booth across from him without a greeting, just met his eyes and waited. "I haven't told her I know," he said. "I figured. But I need you to tell me the rest." Chelsea nodded slowly. "I don't know everything, but I know enough. Brent's been around since last year. It started as collaboration for her brand. He offered to sponsor giveaways, help her with exposure. I think it started emotionally, but that line blurred fast." Ethan took that in. "You knew back then?" "I suspected. She'd talk about him differently, not like a business partner, like he understood her better than anyone else. And when I pushed, she got defensive, said I was being judgmental. And you didn't come to me. I couldn't. She was my best friend. And I kept telling myself maybe I was wrong." He nodded, not angry, just resigned. "You're not wrong." She took a sip of her wine. "I think she feels trapped, not because of you, but because she built this image, this brand of the perfect life. You, the marriage, the house. And when that image stopped feeling true to her, she didn't break it. She just looked for an escape hatch." Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose. It wasn't quite a laugh. "She could have said something. She could have told me." "She could have," Chelsea agreed. "But that would have meant shattering the illusion, and I don't think she's ever had the courage for that." They sat in silence for a few moments. "I'm not telling Caleb yet," Ethan said. "Good. He deserves better than to carry this weight before he has to." Ethan swirled the scotch in his glass. "I need to make sure this ends clean. No drama, no screaming matches." "You will. That's who you are." He looked up. There was something unreadable in his expression. "You said something when you first showed me those messages. You said I deserved better." Chelsea nodded. "I meant it. Still do." "Why?" She hesitated, then said, "Because I've watched you pour yourself into a family that stopped noticing. You loved her even when she turned into someone else. You showed up. And maybe that doesn't get you medals, but it should." Ethan looked away, his jaw tensed. "I need time." "I know." He left soon after. Didn't say goodbye, just nodded once and walked into the fog-heavy evening. The weight of what he knew clung to him like the salt in the air. At home, Lara was already in bed when he returned. The lights were dimmed. She had her sleep mask on, earbuds in. He stood there for a moment, just watching her. Not with affection, not with bitterness, just observing. This was the woman he had married. This was the woman who had built a life with him. And this was the woman who had quietly replaced him in that life without ever saying a word. In the morning, over coffee, she was breezy, talking about Caleb's upcoming science fair, a potential trip to Palm Springs for a conference. Ethan nodded, responded where appropriate. Inside, his mind was somewhere else. That afternoon, he met with his firm's in-house counsel. He laid out a folder of documents, evidence, bank statements, messages. He didn't want to sue. He didn't want to embarrass her. He wanted to understand his options. They discussed divorce strategy, asset division, custody considerations. Massachusetts was a no-fault state, but infidelity could still influence alimony. Ethan wasn't interested in financial punishment. He just wanted the cleanest path forward. He also met with a child psychologist, someone he had worked with on a custody arbitration case. Asked how best to protect Caleb through the coming change. He took notes, asked questions, studied every recommendation. He began preparing a quiet departure. Chelsea stayed silent. She didn't call, didn't text. She understood the space he needed, but Ethan thought of her often, not romantically, not in the way Lara might have imagined, just as a reference point, an anchor of truth in a sea of curated lies. 3 weeks after their conversation at the bar, Ethan booked a weekend trip for himself and Caleb, just the two of them. Nature lodge, no Wi-Fi, hikes, campfires. When he told Lara, she hesitated. "That came out of nowhere," she said. "I think Caleb could use the time," Ethan replied. She looked at him strangely. "You're different lately. Is everything okay?" He held her gaze. "Not really, but it will be." She didn't push. Maybe because deep down, she knew. That weekend, away from the noise and screens, Ethan found moments of clarity. Caleb laughed more than he had in months. They skipped stones, told ghost stories, roasted marshmallows. One night, after Caleb had fallen asleep in their shared cabin, Ethan stepped outside and stared at the stars. He thought about the years that had passed, about the man he had tried to be, the father he still was, the husband he no longer could pretend to be. He didn't cry, but something inside him let go, not of pain, not of anger, just of illusion. On the drive back, he made a decision. It wouldn't be that day, but soon. He would talk to Laura. He would tell her what he knew, not to shame her, not to win, just to end it properly, on his terms, with dignity. And when he did, he would walk away with his son and his truth. Nothing more, nothing less. Chelsea sent a single text the night they returned. Thinking of you both. Hope the trip helped. Ethan stared at the message for a moment, then typed, "It did. Thank you." He hit send, and for the first time in months, he felt steady. The following Friday began like any other, but Ethan knew it wouldn't end that way. The air felt thicker, not with dread, but with inevitability. Caleb was at school. Laura was home finishing up a blog post, bouncing between her laptop and the espresso machine. Ethan watched her from the kitchen doorway. He could remember when just seeing her made his chest tighten, when her presence filled a room with something electric. But now, it was like watching a performance from backstage. You knew the lines, you saw the props, you couldn't believe the illusion anymore. "Can we talk?" he asked. She looked up. Her smile was automatic. "Of course. Everything okay?" Living room. They sat across from each other. Laura curled her legs under her, sipping from a white mug that read, "Hustle and Heart." Ethan held nothing. "This past year I've been trying to understand what changed between us," he began. "I thought it was just time, work, parenthood, but it was more than that." Laura's expression tightened slightly. She set the mug down. "I know about Brent." There it was. No crescendo, no trembling voice, just a flat declaration that rearranged the air in the room. Laura blinked, then swallowed. "What are you talking about?" "Please don't do that," Ethan said, his voice still calm. "Don't lie. Not now." She was silent for a long moment. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." "And you didn't say anything?" "I needed to be sure. I needed to think." Laura looked down at her hands. Her voice dropped. "It wasn't... I never meant to hurt you." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "It's not just about hurt, Laura. It's about reality. I want to know how this became something you could live with." She shook her head. "It didn't start that way. It wasn't physical at first. Brent just listened. He made me feel seen. Not like a brand. Not like a mother or wife. Just me." Ethan looked at her quiet. "And I didn't?" "You were always working. Always building something. Even when you were here, your head was in a case file. And I didn't know how to reach you anymore." He nodded. "So you didn't reach. You escaped." Laura flinched. It wasn't that simple. It never is. But it was still a choice. She looked at him then, really looked. "So what now? You want to separate? Divorce? Take Caleb?" Ethan let the question hang in the air, then said, "I want honesty. I want peace. And I want to raise our son without lying to him about who we are." Laura exhaled shakily. "He doesn't know." "Not yet, but he senses the cracks. He's not blind." For the next hour they talked. No shouting, no accusations, just unraveling a truth that had been twisted too long. Laura confessed to meeting Brent regularly, claimed it ended a month ago. Ethan didn't ask her to prove it. He didn't need to. What mattered was already behind them. By the time Caleb got home, the air in the house had shifted. Ethan made dinner while Laura sat with Caleb doing homework. They still looked like a family, but Ethan knew it was a performance now, one they couldn't keep doing forever. That weekend, Ethan began making quiet moves. He consulted the firm again, this time about filing. He asked the child psychologist to meet with Caleb for a casual session, framed as a school project. Chelsea still kept her distance, but Ethan texted her one evening. "I told her," she replied almost instantly. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected, steadier." There was a pause before she replied again. You did what most wouldn't. You waited for truth. It's the only way it makes sense. Lara didn't resist the inevitable. In the weeks that followed, they agreed on a timeline. Ethan would move out first, into a rented townhouse nearby. Caleb would alternate weekends and Wednesday evenings. There were no screaming matches, no court threats. Just two people realizing their paths had diverged long before they admitted it. Still, not everything came cleanly. When Lara told her parents, the fallout was sharp. They called Ethan cold, said he was abandoning his family. He didn't respond. When Lara made a vague post on her blog about private changes and unseen struggles, Ethan ignored the passive barbs in the comments. He stayed the course. For Caleb. For peace. The hardest part came the first night Caleb stayed at the townhouse. Ethan had set up the spare room like home. Same bed sheets, same posters, even the old nightlight. Caleb wandered the space, quiet. "Is this forever?" he asked. Ethan crouched beside him. "No, but it's different now. And different doesn't mean worse." Caleb looked at him, searching his face. "Did I do something wrong?" Ethan hugged him tightly. "Not even close. This has nothing to do with you. You're the best part of both of us." That night, once Caleb had fallen asleep, Ethan sat in the living room and stared at the ceiling. He thought of the house he'd built, the family he'd tried to hold together, and the hollow spaces between them. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in years. But he felt the grief move through him like a tide, pulling, persistent, familiar. Chelsea reached out again the next day. Coffee? No pressure, just air. They met at a small corner cafe. No tension, no expectations. Just two people who had seen too much of each other to pretend anymore. "You look tired," she said. "I am, but also something else. Like I'm finally breathing my own air again." "That matters. You knew long before I did." "I didn't want to. I kept hoping I was wrong." Ethan looked at her. "You were the only one who told me the truth. That matters too." Chelsea gave a small nod. "So what happens now?" "Now? I raise my son. I rebuild. Maybe slowly, maybe messily, but without lies." She smiled, not wide, not bright, but genuine. "I'm here, if you need air again." As the weeks turned into months, Ethan settled into the rhythm of shared custody, silent mornings, and unexpected peace. He went to Caleb's soccer games, helped with math homework, cooked Sunday pancakes. Lara and he texted when needed, cordial, distant. One day, Chelsea dropped by the townhouse. She had found one of Caleb's books in her car. They ended up talking for an hour, then two. No subtext, just connection. When she left, Ethan stood at the door a moment longer than he meant to. He didn't chase anything, didn't define what it was, but he knew something had shifted. Again. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't the past weighing him down. It was the future quietly waiting. And Ethan, steady as ever, was almost ready to walk toward it. Caleb's school hosted its annual spring showcase 3 months after the separation became official. The auditorium buzzed with children, parents, and the kind of overstimulated joy that only a room full of 10-year-olds could generate. Ethan arrived early, finding a seat near the front, second row left of center. It was the seat Lara used to save for him while juggling juice boxes and wet wipes. Now, he sat there alone, a folded program in his lap, scanning for Caleb's name on the list of class performances. Lara arrived 10 minutes later. Her hair was tied back, professional yet relaxed. She gave him a polite smile and took the seat next to him without a word. Her perfume lingered in the air, faintly floral, subtly familiar. They exchanged a brief glance, acknowledgement, nothing more. When Caleb stepped onto the stage, holding a homemade cardboard telescope and reciting his short speech about Galileo, Ethan felt a swell of pride. Not just for the performance, but for the resilience it took for Caleb to still stand in front of an audience, smile wide, heart open. The kid had weathered the quiet storm of divorce with more poise than many adults. That was no accident. Afterward, in the hallway, Ethan knelt to congratulate him. Caleb grinned and threw his arms around him. "Did I do okay?" "You were brilliant," Ethan said. "You owned that stage." Lara joined them, crouching beside them. You were amazing, honey. That last line? Perfect. Caleb looked between them. Can we get ice cream? All three of us? Like before? The moment stilled. Lara looked at Ethan. He met her gaze, then glanced back at Caleb. Sure, he said. Just like before. They drove separately and met at a familiar spot, a small, old-fashioned creamery near the park, the same place they'd taken Caleb after his first Little League game, the same place where they'd once sat for hours debating baby names. Sitting at the picnic table, Ethan watched Caleb demolish a chocolate sundae. Lara picked at a sorbet. Ethan had black coffee. They talked about summer plans, a new science kit Caleb wanted, whether he should try basketball in the fall. For a while, it felt like the past had returned in the softest way. But only for a while. As the sun dipped low, Lara leaned back and said quietly, "Thank you for agreeing to this. It meant a lot to him." Ethan nodded. "It meant a lot to me too." "You've been steady," she said, "even when I wasn't." He said nothing. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added, "but I hope one day there's understanding." He looked at her. "I understand more than you think, but I'm not working toward forgetting. I'm working toward peace." Lara nodded, her eyes damp but composed. She kissed Caleb's forehead, waved goodbye, and headed to her car. Ethan and Caleb sat in silence, the breeze cool and fragrant with spring. "Do you miss her?" Caleb asked. Ethan took a long breath. "Sometimes I miss who we were, but I don't miss feeling invisible." Caleb nodded, not as a child, but as someone who understood more than he should have to. Later that week, Chelsea came over with a stack of books Ethan had lent her months ago. They sat in his kitchen. She hadn't been there since before everything unraveled. "You've rearranged things," she said, eyes scanning the new layout. "Yeah, needed the space to feel like mine." "It does. It really does." They talked, easily, about work, about mutual friends, about a publisher Chelsea was clashing with, about a dog Ethan was thinking of adopting for Caleb. Then silence. Chelsea broke it. "You're different. Calmer. I feel different. Like I finally stopped trying to solve a puzzle that had missing pieces." "That's a good way to put it." "And you? Still feeling like the enemy of brunch groups everywhere?" She laughed softly. "Her circle iced me out, said I betrayed her. Maybe I did. But I'd do it again. You chose truth. That doesn't make you a villain." "Still felt like one. For a while." He looked at her, the way someone looks at a lighthouse from shore. A fixed point, a warning, a guide. "Would you do it differently?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I might have told you sooner, if I had known what it would feel like after." "And what does it feel like now?" Chelsea paused. "Like I lost a friend, but helped a better one stand up." He didn't reply, just reached for her hand across the table. She didn't pull away. They didn't talk about it that night, but something unspoken shifted, something patient, unrushed. At work, Ethan found himself engaged in ways he hadn't been for years. He took on a pro bono case, mentored a young associate who reminded him of himself at 27, sharp but ungrounded. He started running again, early mornings before sunrise, not for fitness, for focus. Lara occasionally sent updates, photos of Caleb, snippets from her blog, once a long message thanking him for not destroying her in the process. He never replied in more than a sentence. Boundaries, finally drawn. One evening, Caleb was at his mother's. Ethan sat on the back porch nursing a glass of wine. Chelsea joined him, uninvited but welcome. She handed him a manila envelope. "What's this?" "Closure, sort of." Inside were printed emails, conversations between Lara and Brent, the final ones. Apparently, Lara had sent them to Chelsea in a moment of breakdown weeks ago. The emails showed a slow unraveling, Brent distancing, Lara clinging, her saying it had to end, him agreeing too easily. "You sure I should see this?" Ethan asked. "I wasn't, but you always wanted the full picture." He skimmed the pages. There was nothing new in content, but the tone mattered. Lara hadn't walked away empowered. She had been left, and that added a new shade to everything. "She didn't win," he said quietly. Chelsea shook her head. "No one did. Except maybe Caleb." Because he has you. Because he has truth. Chelsea leaned back, looking at the night sky. So what now? Ethan sipped the wine. Now I stop carrying other people's weight. They sat in the quiet hum of suburban peace. No sirens, no yelling, just wind through leaves and the soft thud of a basketball somewhere down the block. When Chelsea left, Ethan didn't walk her to her car. He didn't need to. The door closed gently. No words, no promises. Just trust. At Caleb's next soccer game, Ethan stood on the sidelines, arms crossed, smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Lara was there too, standing several feet away. She waved once. He nodded. Chelsea arrived midway through the second half. She didn't sit beside him. She didn't have to, just stood quietly a few feet away, watching. Ethan felt the presence of something rebuilt, something slow and real, not a replacement, not a rebound. Just proof that truth, when nurtured, didn't leave you hollow. As the whistle blew and the kids ran off the field, Caleb raced toward them both. Ethan crouched to meet him, arms wide, heart full. He had lost a marriage, but he had found something steadier. A version of himself he didn't have to explain. And as Caleb grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward the parking lot, Ethan let himself believe in something he hadn't for a long time. Not justice, not revenge, peace. Uncomplicated, hard-earned peace. The dog they adopted came from a rescue shelter on the south side of town. Medium-sized, part border collie, part who knows what, with mismatched eyes and a cautious tilt to his head. Caleb named him Rocket, after the superhero raccoon. Chelsea was the one who found the listing online. She sent it without a caption, just a link. Ethan clicked on it during a quiet Friday afternoon at work, then stared at the scruffy face on his screen for a long time. 3 days later, Rocket was in the back seat of Ethan's car, licking Caleb's ear and shedding fur on the seatbelt buckle. They stopped for dog treats, a leash, and one of those squeaky toys that would become the soundtrack to their evenings. It was the first time Ethan felt the house shift again, not toward the past, but toward something new. Chelsea visited more frequently. She brought dog biscuits and recommendations for training classes. Sometimes she and Caleb would sit on the floor together, trying to teach Rocket to shake paws. Other times, she and Ethan would talk on the porch, their voices low, unhurried. He never made a move. She never hinted. But there was a quiet understanding between them now, stitched from shared scars and mutual survival. One Saturday morning, Ethan stood at the kitchen counter, slicing apples for Caleb's pancakes. Chelsea came in through the back door without knocking. Rocket bounded to greet her. "You two are getting domestic," she said, scratching behind Rocket's ears. "Don't scare me like that," Ethan replied, grinning. "No, really, this dog has better snacks than I do. He has a better life than most humans." Chelsea poured herself coffee, then leaned against the counter. "You ever think about what comes next?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked out the window where Caleb was in the yard throwing a tennis ball. "I used to think it meant fixing what broke. Now I think it means building something new, without pretending. That sounds exhausting." "It's not. Not when you start small." They watched Caleb laugh as Rocket chased the ball and slid in the grass. "So," Chelsea said, sipping her coffee, "you still working toward peace?" "Every day." There was another silence between them, but it felt light this time. Familiar. Ethan started writing again. Not professionally, not for court, but for himself. Memos he never sent. Letters to Caleb about what it meant to be a man. Notes about the lessons no one ever taught him. He kept them in a folder marked simply, "When he's ready." One evening, as he read a draft by the porch light, Chelsea leaned over. "You ever gonna let him read these?" "One day, when it matters." "You think he'll understand?" "I hope he never has to." She rested her chin on her hand, watching him. "You're not the man I met 5 years ago." "Good. That guy was trying too hard to be who everyone expected." "And now?" "Now, I only want to be someone Caleb trusts. Someone I trust." As spring melted into summer, routines settled. Caleb split time between houses with more ease. Rocket grew bolder, more playful. Ethan stopped checking Lara's social media altogether. He didn't need to know what she was showing the world. He only cared about the world he was shaping. One morning, Laura asked if they could meet, just the two of them, neutral ground. They met at a small bench in the park where they used to bring Caleb in a stroller. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie, no makeup. She looked tired, real. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, "for not turning this into a battlefield. We both lost enough. Why add to it?" She looked at her hands. "I made mistakes, big ones, and not just the affair. I stopped showing up long before Brent. We both did, in different ways." She nodded. "I hope someday Caleb sees more than just the broken parts." "He will, if we keep showing him the healed ones." They sat quietly for a while. Then she said, "Chelsea's been around." "She has. She's good for him, for you." "I know." She didn't say more. She didn't have to. It was a passing of something unspoken. Not a blessing, not approval, just understanding. Chelsea and Ethan never labeled anything. They didn't have a first kiss marked by fanfare or declarations. One night, after a quiet dinner, she simply leaned against him on the couch, and he didn't move. And they stayed that way for a long time. Ethan never told Caleb they were a couple, because they weren't. Not yet. Not like that. But over time, Caleb started setting out a third plate without being asked, started including her in his weekend plans, called Rocket our dog in passing. Chelsea caught Ethan's eye once after that, eyebrows raised. He just smiled. The firm offered him a partnership chair in a new regional office. It meant more responsibility, more hours. He turned it down. He didn't say why, but he knew. He wanted to be home at 6. He wanted pancakes on Saturday. He wanted soccer games and dog walks and late-night porch talks. He didn't want to sacrifice life for image again. The final conversation with Laura about custody came in the fall. They were both calmer by then. It ended with a signed agreement that protected Caleb's rhythm. As they left the office, Laura paused. "We didn't get the ending we wanted." "No," Ethan said, "but maybe we got the one we needed." She nodded and walked to her car. That winter, snow fell early. Ethan taught Caleb how to shovel the driveway, how to salt the walk. Chelsea made hot cocoa and pretended not to spoil Rocket with whipped cream. The three of them played Scrabble on the floor, laughed, argued over whether yeet was a real word. It was a life, not perfect, not curated, but real. Ethan stood at the window one night watching snow gather on the porch railing. Chelsea joined him, a blanket around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How strange it is, to lose everything you thought mattered and end up with something better." "Not better, just honest." He looked at her. "That might be the same thing." Chelsea smiled, then rested her head on his shoulder. No need for more. And Ethan, for the first time since it all began, didn't feel like something was missing. He felt whole. The day Chelsea moved in wasn't marked by a grand gesture or any announcement. It happened like most things between them had, quietly, gradually, with mutual consent built on unspoken rhythms. Her books started appearing on Ethan's shelves, her shampoo in his bathroom. One morning she made coffee before he could and handed him the mug without a word. That was the moment he knew. They were sharing a life now, not just moments. Caleb adapted easily. It helped that Chelsea never forced herself into the role of step anything. She was just there, consistent, kind, funny, in a dry way that complemented Ethan's quiet warmth. She didn't try to be his mom. She didn't try to replace anything. She existed beside them, not in place of anyone else. Rocket adjusted too. He took turns sleeping beside Caleb and curling up at Chelsea's feet. His presence filled the little silences in the house that used to feel hollow. Now they felt like calm. Ethan had taken to journaling at night, something he once considered indulgent. The habit had grown from those letters he wrote to Caleb. But now, the pages were for himself. Not about Laura or Brent or betrayal, about patience, about presence, about how quiet doesn't have to mean emptiness. One night, after Chelsea had fallen asleep reading beside him, Ethan pulled an old photo album off the shelf. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were pictures from when he and Laura were first married. Honeymoon photos, housewarming shots, hospital pictures when Caleb was born. He studied the faces, not with regret, but with gratitude. That part of his life had given him Caleb. It had taught him limits, had taught him the pain of silence and the power of finally breaking it. The next day, Caleb asked to bring Rocket to school for a show and tell. Ethan cleared it with the teacher, made sure Rocket was groomed and leashed. Chelsea packed a small bag of treats and a lint roller. In the classroom, Caleb introduced Rocket with a confidence Ethan hadn't seen before. He talked about rescue, responsibility, trust. He said, "Rocket was scared at first, but we gave him time, and he became part of our pack." Ethan and Chelsea exchanged a glance across the room. On the way home, Caleb asked, "Do you think people are like dogs? Like, needing time to feel safe?" Ethan nodded. "I think people need even more time, and the right people around them." Caleb looked out the window. "I'm glad Rocket came to us." "Me too." Weeks passed, quiet and good. Lara continued to be part of Caleb's life, and Ethan never interfered. She had started dating again. She sent a message to let Ethan know, not asking permission, just informing him. He appreciated that. There was no bitterness anymore, just space. One Sunday afternoon, while Caleb was at a friend's house and Rocket was sprawled in a sunbeam, Ethan and Chelsea took a walk around the neighborhood. No destination, just movement. "You ever think about the moment it all broke?" Chelsea asked. "You mean with Lara?" "Yeah, or maybe when it started to break." "I used to. I looked for signs, patterns, the first wrong turn, but it wasn't one thing. It was a slow forgetfulness, a mutual drifting." "You don't blame her?" "I did, for a while, but blame just locks you into the past. I wanted freedom more than anger." Chelsea nodded. "I wonder if she ever understood what she gave up." "Maybe, but that's hers to carry, not mine." They passed a group of kids drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. One had written, "Trust is earned," in wobbly pink letters. Chelsea pointed to it. "Out of the mouths of babes." Ethan smiled. "That one's going on the fridge." As autumn approached, life settled into a cadence. Caleb started middle school. Rocket grew lazier. Ethan took fewer cases, preferring quality over billable hours. Chelsea started a side project, a digital journal for people going through separation, built from her own experience watching someone else's marriage fracture. "Not a guide," she told Ethan one night. "Just a place to say, here's what I saw, here's what hurt, here's what healed." Ethan supported it. Proof again that silence could be turned into something useful. One Thursday evening, Ethan cooked dinner while Chelsea sorted laundry and Caleb practiced piano. Rocket snored on the rug. It was the kind of evening that once would have passed unnoticed. Now, it felt like an anchor. "You know what I realized today?" Chelsea said, walking in with a laundry basket. "What?" "That I haven't checked social media in 3 days. I used to live on it. Now, I forget it exists." "That's because you live in a house where the dog is more entertaining than the internet," she grinned. "And because for once I don't feel like I have to prove anything, not even to myself." Ethan paused. "You never did." She tilted her head. "You too, you know. You never needed to be perfect, just present." He reached over and kissed her forehead. No big moment, no music swell, just life, just peace. That weekend they went to the lake, rented a small cabin. Caleb brought a sketchbook. Chelsea brought books. Ethan brought nothing but himself. On the second morning, as fog curled over the water, Ethan stood on the porch with coffee. Caleb came up beside him, hair messy, blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "Do you ever miss when it was just you and Mom and me?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But I don't miss the silence that came after." Caleb nodded. "I like our life now. It's not perfect, but it feels real. That's all I ever wanted." Later that day, they built a fire, roasted marshmallows, told stories. Chelsea told one about a haunted attic that had Caleb wide-eyed. Ethan told one about his grandfather's farm. Caleb told one he made up about Rocket being an alien in disguise. It wasn't curated, it wasn't planned, but it was theirs. Back home, Chelsea published the first installment of her journal. She didn't promote it, just made it live. Ethan read it late one night. In it, she wrote, "Sometimes the people who break your heart weren't cruel. They were just lost. And sometimes You heal not by finding someone new, but by becoming someone new beside people who let you. Ethan closed his laptop and sat in the dark. Not sad, not overwhelmed, just full. The next morning, Caleb handed him a school assignment. Write about a person you admire. Ethan unfolded the paper. I admire my dad because he always tells me the truth. He doesn't pretend to be okay when he isn't. But he also doesn't stay broken. He listens, he helps, and he tries. That's all I want to be when I grow up. Someone who tries. Ethan blinked hard, folded the paper, put it in the folder with the rest of the letters. Later, he stood outside as Rocket barked at a squirrel, Caleb shouting after him, Chelsea laughing from the porch. This was not the life he thought he'd have. It was better. The following winter was quiet in all the ways that mattered. Snow came and stayed, blanketing the neighborhood in a soft hush that made even the busiest streets seem still. Ethan found comfort in routines. He would wake early, shovel the driveway, make coffee while Rocket waited by the door, and pack Caleb's lunch with little handwritten notes. Nothing grand, nothing exceptional. But that was the point. The absence of chaos, of emotional whiplash, was its own kind of peace. Chelsea had begun writing more regularly. Her journal had gained traction, mostly through word of mouth. Messages trickled in from strangers who thanked her for putting into words what they hadn't yet understood. One woman wrote, "Your story made me feel like I wasn't crazy, just hurt." Chelsea read that line aloud to Ethan one night while they sat at the dining table, mugs between them and soft jazz on the speaker. He didn't say much, just reached across the table and held her hand. One day in January, Laura called. Not a text, not an email, a real call. Ethan answered, unsure what to expect. "Caleb told me about the journal," she said. "He mentioned Chelsea's been helping people." "She has," Ethan said. "It wasn't the plan, but it's turning into something good." Laura was quiet. Then, "I'm glad." There was a pause. "I think I'm getting there too," she added. "I've started seeing a counselor, trying to be more honest with myself." Ethan nodded, knowing she couldn't see him. "That's good. That matters. I didn't realize how much of my life I curated for the approval of strangers. Most people don't until it costs them something they can't get back," she sighed. "You're not angry anymore, are you?" "No, and that's not for your sake. It's for mine." "You know," she said, "for a kid who likes comic books, you're pretty wise." Caleb grinned. "That's because I have a really good team." They stayed out until the fire dimmed, until Rocket curled between them with a heavy sigh, and the stars blinked into place above their heads. It wasn't the end of their story. It was just another page. But for once, it felt like the right one. The summer before Caleb entered high school brought with it a sense of calm so complete that Ethan almost didn't recognize it. For years, his life had been shaped by unspoken tensions, by silence used like a weapon, by tiptoeing around what wasn't working. Now the quiet was different. It didn't threaten to explode. It settled. Caleb had grown taller, his voice starting to shift, his jokes carrying a new self-awareness. Rocket, slower now, still followed him around like a furry guardian. Ethan spent more time outside than ever before, fixing up the porch, planting herbs with Chelsea, going on long walks with no destination. One night, after a community movie night at the park, Ethan stood at the kitchen sink washing out a cooler while Caleb sat on the floor feeding Rocket scraps of leftover popcorn. Chelsea, barefoot, leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching them both. "You ever think about the fact that none of this was supposed to happen?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "All the time. And then I remember that supposed to doesn't mean better, just familiar." Chelsea smiled, her eyes warm. "I used to plan everything down to the minute. Now, I forget what day it is." "You happy forgetting?" "I think I'm just finally remembering what matters." That weekend, they visited Ethan's parents in Vermont. It was the first time he brought Chelsea officially. There was no tension, no awkward explanations, just introductions over grilled corn and stories around the fire pit. Caleb took to his grandparents quickly, and they took to Chelsea without hesitation. Ethan watched as his father handed her a beer and started explaining the bird calls echoing through the woods. It was the kind of moment he hadn't dared to hope for, let alone expect. On the drive back, Caleb dozed off in the back seat. Chelsea looked over at Ethan. They love you. They love Caleb. That helps. No, I mean they love who you are now, not who you used to try to be. Ethan didn't say anything, just reached across the center console and rested his hand over hers. The following month, Chelsea was offered a book deal, a compilation of essays based on her journal entries. She hesitated at first. It feels strange making something public that started so private. You never asked for the spotlight, Ethan said, but that doesn't mean your voice doesn't belong there. She signed the deal, quietly, with no launch party, no big reveal, just a dinner at home, Caleb cheering and Rocket barking at the sound of clinking glasses. In late August, Ethan and Caleb stood outside a sporting goods store, arguing gently about which backpack was the most grown-up. You don't need 30 zippers, Ethan said, but this one has a charging port. You barely keep your phone above 10%, Caleb grinned, which is why I need the port. They settled on the overpriced one. Ethan didn't mind. It was less about the bag and more about letting his son feel prepared. On the first day of school, Caleb stood at the edge of the driveway in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, hair combed neatly, shoulders straight. You ready? Ethan asked. Caleb gave a half shrug. I guess. You're allowed to be nervous. You're also allowed to enjoy this. What if it all changes again? Ethan looked him in the eye. Then we change with it. And we face it. Together. Caleb nodded and walked toward the bus stop. Chelsea joined Ethan on the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He's becoming his own person, she said. Best thing I've ever helped build. You know, I think your next letter to him should be about that. Ethan paused. I think it should be from both of us. Autumn came faster that year. The nights cooled quickly, the trees burning red and orange. Chelsea's manuscript went through edits. Caleb made new friends. Rocket napped longer and barked less. One evening they had dinner on the back porch. The air was crisp and the table was set with candles, mismatched plates, and warm food. When do you think we'll stop calling this the new normal? Chelsea asked. When we finally realized this was always the life waiting for us. We just didn't know how to reach it yet. Caleb chimed in, mouth full. You guys are so dramatic. It's just dinner. They laughed and kept eating. The last letter Ethan wrote to Caleb that year was shorter than the rest. It simply said, being brave isn't about pretending nothing hurts. It's about choosing to keep building anyway. You taught me that. I hope I never stop learning. When they hung up, Ethan sat in silence for a while. Chelsea came in, setting a bowl of popcorn on the couch. Everything okay? Yeah, just Laura. She's trying. Chelsea sat beside him. That's all anyone can really do. As February approached, Ethan began planning something small for Caleb's birthday. He asked him if he wanted a party. Caleb shook his head. Just us. And Rocket. Maybe a movie night. Any friends you want to invite? Can we just make pancakes for dinner again, like last year? Absolutely. That night, Ethan and Chelsea strung up lights in the living room. They baked a cake from scratch, which didn't rise properly but still tasted like joy. Caleb beamed as they all wore party hats and let Rocket lick frosting off a plate. Later, while cleaning up, Chelsea whispered, You know, this might be my favorite version of a birthday. Me too, Ethan said. It feels earned. Caleb went to bed with a smile on his face and a new set of sketching pencils under his pillow. In March, Chelsea received an invitation to speak at a wellness conference. It was her first real public appearance since publishing the journal. She hesitated. I don't know if I want to be the face of heartbreak, she said one morning, sitting at the edge of the bed. You're not, Ethan said. You're the face of getting back up. She looked at him for a long time, then smiled. Will you come with me? Always. They traveled to Chicago. Caleb stayed with Laura for the weekend. The city buzzed with cold wind and hot coffee and 1,000 stories unfolding in every window they passed. At the conference, Chelsea spoke about truth, about dignity, about the power of having one person believe you when you're unraveling. She never mentioned names, but Ethan heard echoes of their story in every sentence. After, a woman in her 60s approached Chelsea in the hallway. She said, I thought healing was for young people. Thank you for proving me wrong. Ethan watched as Chelsea teared up quietly, then nodded. Back home, life resumed. But something had shifted again. A soft confidence had taken root in Chelsea. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building. Spring came slowly. The trees budded late, the days stayed chilly longer than usual, but the light began to stretch, and the air smelled like things were growing. One Sunday, Ethan took Caleb to a nearby field to fly kites. It was something they hadn't done since before the divorce. Caleb held the spool like a pro, guiding the dragon-shaped fabric high into the sky. "It feels weird," Caleb said, watching it dance above them. "What does?" "Feeling happy again." Ethan looked at him. "It's okay to feel happy. You don't have to earn it every time." Caleb nodded, chewing on the thought. They stayed until the sun dipped below the horizon. That evening, while Ethan made dinner, Caleb sat at the table drawing. Rocket lay under his feet. Chelsea came in from the backyard with a small herb plant in her hands. "Look what your son helped me pot," she said, brushing soil off her shirt. "We're growing things now?" "Figured the house could use something alive that isn't shedding on everything." Ethan smiled. "Fair point." Later that week, he found himself standing in front of a mirror, adjusting a tie, something he hadn't worn in months. Chelsea appeared behind him, straightening his collar. "Big client meeting?" "No, Caleb's school asked me to speak for career day." She raised her eyebrows. "They know you're just a boring lawyer, right?" "Hey, mergers and acquisitions are thrilling to 11-year-olds. You'll do great." At the school, he talked about ethics, about decisions, about telling the truth, even when it was inconvenient. He didn't mention the past, but he didn't need to. When he finished, the teacher thanked him. Caleb beamed. One of the kids asked, "Are you a hero?" Ethan laughed. "No, just someone who tries." That night, Caleb placed a note on his pillow. "Dad, I liked your talk. I think you are a hero, even if you don't wear a cape." Ethan didn't say anything. He just tucked the note into the folder with the others. As the season shifted fully into spring, Chelsea suggested they take a weekend road trip, just the three of them. No plans, no hotels, just a car, a tent, and whatever map Caleb decided to draw. They ended up in a state park, surrounded by trees and the kind of silence that hummed instead of echoed. They hiked, roasted hot dogs, listened to owls. On the last night, as they sat around a fire, Chelsea looked at Ethan and said, "Do you ever miss the life you thought you'd have?" He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." Caleb leaned against Ethan's side, sleepy. "Do you think Mom's happy now?" Ethan stared at the flames. "I think she's trying to be, and sometimes that matters more than getting it right." Caleb nodded. "I hope she finds someone who gives her what you give us." Chelsea reached over, touching Ethan's hand. He tucked it into the folder, now thick and worn, and placed it back on the shelf. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still bad days, miscommunications, messes, but the difference now was how they handled them, with presence, with honesty, with a hand always reaching out instead of pulling away. One Saturday in November, Chelsea launched her book quietly online. It became a small bestseller. People wrote in, asked questions, shared pain. She read them all, replied to most, and never once made it about her. Ethan watched her work and knew that his son was growing up with two examples, one of strength and one of grace. Caleb brought home a project titled, "What My Family Taught Me." He read it aloud at dinner. "They taught me that love doesn't always look like a fairy tale. Sometimes it looks like pancakes and dog hair and making space for each other. It looks like showing up and staying." Ethan didn't cry, but he excused himself for a moment, just long enough to collect what needed collecting. The last night of the year, they sat on the porch under a thick blanket, rocket wedged between them, fireworks flashing across the sky in the distance. Chelsea leaned into him. "Do you feel done?" "Done with what?" "The chapter. The rebuilding." Ethan looked at Caleb inside, dancing badly to a song on the radio. "Not done," he said. "Just living. And that's enough." Chelsea smiled, and for once, no one had to say another word. What did you think of this story and how he handled everything? Would you have made the same choice or walked a different path? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe.